Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. We've been waiting a little while for people to join us. The number of participants is increasing, but very conscious of time, so we'll make a start. And welcome to our Digital Farming Summit. My name is Nick Banks, and I am a partner at Scott & Bland, and I lead our advisory team for our agricultural and farming clients. This is our January farming event, and the first that we've delivered digitally in this new world. So no fire exit announcements. Provide your own coffee, comfort breaks at your own leisure. I'm very much hoping my dog doesn't bark. If he does, I apologise. There seems to be a number of Amazon delivery drivers turning up, so hopefully that won't happen this morning. I'm also pleased to say that because delivering a summit like this is more cost efficient, we have pledged to donate what we would normally provide for bacon rolls to Yana, which I'm sure many of you will appreciate is a charity that does good work supporting mental health in the farming and rural community. And I think given the business challenges of the 2020 harvest and the pandemic and lockdown 3, mental health is something that is very important at the current time. I hope you find this morning's session interesting. I devised this concept late summer, autumn last year, and I'm very grateful to the speakers joining me today and indeed next Wednesday for reacting so positively when I invited them to speak. We have split the event over two days, and I know a number of you joining us today have registered to join next week as well, which is great. Very conscious that some of us suffer from Zoom and Teams fatigue, so we wanted to try and keep the events sort of in a manageable length, which is why we decided to split them over the 2 days. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Caroline Drummond from Leaf, who will present Farming to Enrich the Environment. And then David Robinson from Frontier will be discussing cost-effective crop establishment, and Doug Field will be joining us from the East of England Co-op to discuss, which I think will be very interesting, sort of the impact of the pandemic on food retail, knowing that some farming businesses have diversified into retail and farm shops. And then to close our session, I'm grateful to Will Mitcham, a partner at consultancy firm Wilson Raitt, who's going to chair a short panel session, time permitting, where we happily try to address any of the questions that you may have. And I do encourage you to interact through the chat function, and I can see many of you have already, which is great, but do post questions through the chat function as we go through the session, and we'll try and pick those up towards the end. Right, so next slide, please, Elizabeth. I thought I'd start my session with an opening slide, try and summarise some of the key statistics of the farming industry in the UK. On the 11th of December, DEFRA produced their first forecast of total farm income for 2020. And I'm sure many of you won't be surprised to see that given the challenge of the 2020 harvest and the difficulties establishing crops, and the mixed weather at times of harvest, that it does show just over a fifth reduction in the same figure for 2019. In 2019, agriculture contributed 0.53% to the national economy of the UK, but DEFRA statistics suggest it utilised 72% of the landmass of the UK. I've reported in my slide the line other subsidies on production, which is a figure disclosed in the calculation of total farm income, and expressed that as a percentage, just to really put into context the quantum of support that the sector has the benefit of, and therefore the potential impact of the subsidy reform, which is the key issue that we're exploring this morning. Next slide, please. In November last year, DEFRA published the Path to Sustainable Farming document, an agricultural transition plan for 2021 to 2024. And if you haven't read that document, I do recommend that you do look through it. It's 66 pages long, but it's an interesting read and does put into context what DEFRA are seeking to achieve with the reforms. Clearly, at the nub of this is a reduction in direct payments. And it's the intention that those payments will be removed by 2027. My slide summarises the rates of reduction at different band levels of the payments. Annex D in that document, if you do look at it, gives some examples, and the reduction is sort of a tapered effect. So, for example, if you're in receipt of a £40,000 subsidy payment, you have a 5% reduction on the first 30,000 in the 2021 year, and then a 10% reduction on the £10,000 up to the 40. So the reduction in 2021 scheme year would be £2,500. So your £40,000 subsidy would be reduced to £37,500. And clearly, the larger recipients, or the recipients of larger amounts, will receive a more aggressive reduction at those sums beyond 50 and thereafter £150,000. In that document, there's a statement of the total funding that's likely to be reduced, and there's a commitment that that funding will be diverted and redeployed in other schemes to support the sector. Clearly, the impact of this is likely to perhaps mean some farmers are not viable, or some farmers don't wish to embrace what's required under the replacement schemes. So there is a mechanism for a lump sum to be paid for those farmers who wish to exit the sector. More clarity, I think, is needed, not least from our perspective in advising clients on taxation, how those sums would be taxed, and exactly what the definition of exit is. Next slide, please. So we're very keen as advisors to our clients that we're on the front foot with this to try and help our clients manage the transition. A figure that's not explicit in any sets of accounts really is EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. And EBITDA is a simple measure of a business's capacity to service its debt, and also in a farming business, service debt and also meet the requirements of the owners of the business, often the family, to meet their drawings so that the cash flow of the business is kept in check. If you're trading as a limited company, then those drawings may be in the form of a dividend. Debt, of course, is any term debt to the bank, perhaps for the purchase of land or investment infrastructure, and of course any hire purchase liabilities that you may have for the purpose of buying equipment. My graph on this slide summarises an example of a farming business who has receipt of a direct payment of just over £53,000. And I've shown on this graph the level of debt and drawings that this business has to service and the owners draw from that business. And the business has a 31st of March 2020 year end. So my March 2020 accounts generally reported the outcome of the 2019 harvest, which the DEFRA statistics for the UK show that the 2019 harvest was relatively strong. So in the financial year 2020, the business was meeting its obligations on an EBITDA measure of 1.26. So it was covering its obligation to service debt and what the owners required to draw from that business, just over 1.25 times. What I've then demonstrated is the impact of the direct payment reduction in the scheme years from 2021 through to 2024. And you can see that by 2022, that cover becomes more marginal. And by 2023, if no action is taken to address the shortfall in income to this business through the reduction in the direct payment, then potentially the profits of the business are not robust enough to meet its debt obligations. It probably will meet its debt obligations, but it wouldn't be able to meet drawings that the family may require to meet cost of living. And inevitably that may mean burning an overdraft, But clearly it does mean that action is going to need to be taken to replace the funding that hasn't been received through the direct payment. It's imperative that if you have debt in the balance sheet, that you are conscious of any covenants to the bank, and often loan agreements will include a covenant as to how your business performance needs to cover obligations to the bank, and clearly being mindful of that is important with the transition that the businesses are going to face through this period. We're intending to provide this summary for our clients with accounts that we produce through this forthcoming year, now that we have clarity on the rate of reduction, our philosophy being that forewarned is forearmed. Next slide, please. So to remain financially sustainable, and really the premise of today's session, I devised 3 pillars to what I believe will make a farming enterprise and estate financially sustainable. And those 3 pillars are to maximise the opportunity that the new agri-environment support regime provides, clearly diversification, and enhancing profitability. And the size of the enhancing profitability pillar being greater than either of the other 2 is deliberate, because if one can enhance the return from the key asset of the business, the greatest capital employed is the land, then ultimately that will produce the most sustainable business. If that enhancement of profit is achieved through improving soil health, then you're not only increasing the financial return, but you're protecting the asset. And that asset itself will protect those who earn a living from it. Next slide, please. I think it's probably fair to say that there's much clarity on the rate of reduction, which I think is helpful, because clearly businesses need to be prepared, but there may not be as much clarity or information exactly on the form of the schemes that are going to replace the direct payments. But obviously we're all aware that the emphasis on the objectives of the agricultural bill is sustainable farming to protect and enhance the environment, public good for public money. The threat of climate change is real, and I know Caroline will be explaining some of the global challenges we face. And next week we have Katharina from NatWest Group, who's an economist, who will be talking about some of the potential economic impact of climate change. And having heard her presentation, it's quite compelling. As the new legislation is shaped by Parliament, we can see the key priorities, which I've shown on my slide here. And within Part 1 of the new Agricultural Act, those priorities are to encourage increased sustainable productivity in the sector, significantly contribute to meeting the goal set out in the 25-year environmental plan, contribute to UK's net zero carbon emissions goal by 2050, and protect and improve the health and welfare of livestock. Next slide, please. And the document that have been released sets out the schemes that will be available. And indeed, the document I referenced earlier, the Path to Sustainable Farming, provides some information around what these schemes are intended to enable those who participate to achieve, to unlock potential funding. And clearly there's a pilot scheme that's being rolled out to help shape the final scheme. I think ELMS is not a subsidy. It's a payment for providing a service. Some will be better placed to maximise the opportunity within some of those schemes, particularly landscape recovery schemes. If there's a need to invest in the natural environment through tree planting, hedgerows, etc., then I think security of tenure will be an important factor. And that may drive the need to change tenancy and other land occupation arrangements. I think it's clear that to put oneself in the best position to maximise the opportunity, you have to appraise the natural capital of your estate to see what schemes you can take advantage of. There is the Farming Investment Fund, and there is emphasis in the scheme notes to encourage farmers to be innovative. Innovation can perhaps improve productivity, particularly through the adoption of artificial intelligence or robotics. But I think it is fair to say in summary that further clarity is needed, but consultation has begun and the pilot scheme is in train. Next slide, please. The second of the three pillars is clearly diversification, a well-trodden path. Many farm businesses have diversified into holiday camps, commercial lettings, farm cafes, retail operations, soft fruit, poultry. Some diversified activities have been massively impacted by the pandemic, for example, wedding venues and hospitality. The recent business interruption insurance case, which I think is back end of last week, perhaps offers hope that there will be some replacement of income if they can successfully claim under that insurance policy. Elms potentially creates an opportunity. Elms in a way is diversification. So if you are planting trees, then timber, nuts, fruit from agroforestry, or potentially in reintroduction of livestock or poultry as part of a regenerative approach. Joining us next week will be Mark Williams, who's the chair of the British Egg Council, and he'll be discussing challenges and opportunities in the commercial egg sector. Demand for egg product has changed during this pandemic as the demands of the consumer have changed. I think if you secure value in the supply chain, so if one can position yourself from being the grower to the processor to the retailer, then clearly you're retaining the margin of each step of that process. And that's going to maximize the return for the produce that you grow. And clearly, I think the pandemic has changed consumer habits with shopping local, better appreciation of the source of food, and Doug speaking later about what the co-op has seen in changing in consumer habits will be interesting. If one does diversify, then clearly business structure is important to manage risk and also to ensure tax efficiency. Diversification also needs to make sure that we retain very important tax reliefs, capital tax reliefs, particularly potentially inheritance tax, very much so with some of the noises that are being made in terms of tax reform from the Office of Tax Simplification. And next month's budget is something that I have to say looking forward to. That may not be quite what I mean, but certainly there'll be some interesting announcements, particularly with a farming estate between trading and investment activities. And my tax partner Gavin will be talking next week to cover off some of those issues. Next slide, please. So this slide really addresses the largest pillar in my three-pillar concept, which is enhancing profitability of the farming operation. And what I wish to demonstrate with this slide is the compound benefit of incremental gain. So I have summarized on this slide an extract from a farm management report for one of my clients with regards growing winter wheat. And you can see the mechanics of this calculation is, as you all expect, anticipated price per tonne, yield per hectare of the crop grown, what that may mean in terms of gross output, and then the costs, direct costs of seed, fertiliser, spray to derive the gross margin, and then power and machinery costs to derive the contribution. And I've shown that at £147 a tonne, and I've then applied a 2% improvement to each of those elements. So I've improved my price by 2%, I've improved my yield by 2%, I've reduced my input costs by 2%. And you can see the compound effect of that incremental gain at each element is a not insignificant increase in profit. So I thought it useful to try and explore how that incremental gain could be achieved. It's also worth noting that clearly this is just an arable example of an arable crop, but I think incremental gain can be, if you are operating a farm shop, for example, as a diversified activity, incremental gain could be applied to that. So if you have an effective social media marketing campaign to increase footfall, then your retail experience means that those that visit your shop are buying more. You're increasing your average transaction value. And then if you're selling more, then potentially through economies of scale, you can source your produce to sell at a better price. And each element in that analysis is going to clearly enhance the profitability of that farm shop. Returning to my arable example of winter wheat, then as a commodity producer, you're arguably a price taker, not a price maker. But from the work I do, I can see that some farmers achieve a better price than others. Storage, grain pools, marketing costs, all factors that have a positive difference. I think going forward, it's important to understand the market and what the needs and wants of the market are. And probably collaboration with others is going to be the most effective way to influence the markets. Moving from output to costs, David will shortly be expertly speaking about cost-effective crop establishment, and his insight will undoubtedly identify ways of managing and enhancing margin. Yield is clearly subject to a number of variables, notwithstanding weather and pests. I think a potential outcome of ELMS clearly is if more land is planted with trees or returned to nature to improve the habitat, then that implies, or it follows, that less land will be in production. I thought it was noteworthy at the Oxford Farming Conference that George Eustace put emphasis on gene editing in his presentation. And is that so that you can grow more from less? An interesting development, and I know a very emotive issue. Evolution of farming practice to focus on enriching the environment, it's likely to lead to a reduction in non-organic inputs, given the emphasis to improve soil health and biodiversity through minimum tillage. Clearly, fertilizer is an expensive input. Reduction in reliance on that is potentially going to improve cost efficiency of growing crop if yield can be maintained. And precision farming, of course, will improve the effectiveness of applying chemicals and therefore potentially rationalise and make those costs more efficient too. There was an interesting article in Farmers Weekly about machinery and soil compaction and the implications for cost and yield and soil health. And I've recently had conversations with my clients who are assessing their farming technique and looking to change their tractors to reduce weight, reduce horsepower to reflect the intended operations. And that's clearly a reaction to the direction of travel in terms of the farming to protect the environment. Of course, changing tractors, the conversations around capital allowances, all aware that you secure capital allowances on buying machinery, and the frustration at the time of one of those conversations was we were waiting for the annual investment allowance to be clarified by the Chancellor, which now continues at £1 million. Machinery strategy is an important part of controlling costs of power and machinery, and we have Adrian and Sam next week joining us from local machinery supplier Tuckwells. I think machinery share is something that perhaps should be embraced more going forward to help manage costs and get economies of scale. And we also perhaps need to consider whether the argument between leasing and owning machinery and whether one approach is more cost effective than another. Final observation on this analysis, conscious of time, is my carbon arrow, because I think clearly there's emphasis on management of carbon, the footprint of a farm business and the sector. Again, a very emotive issue with some of the journalism and all around this, and Twitter can often kick off when things are commented about carbon and attributing the carbon footprint to certain activities in agriculture. But I think it's clear to show that if reading what I've read and talking to my clients like I have, then improving soil health potentially improves the carbon capacity of that soil as a carbon store. And there's an emerging market in carbon offset and environmental credits. and that's potentially another revenue stream for farms and estates. And I think that's going to be, more and more is going to come out through the year of that, and it's very interesting to see how that's going to develop. It's also very, it's so many different techniques to measure the carbon footprint of the farming enterprise. So I think that's definitely a space to watch. Next slide, please. So to conclude, it is a period of change, and I think that going forward, collaboration amongst farmers will become more important to get best value from what is grown, to get best value from the supply chain, and gain cost efficiencies in production. But I think equally important is collaboration amongst the advisory team around a farming business to support the farmer. And I think farmers are, many farmers are custodian. They own the asset, but also custodians of the asset. That's an enduring asset for the next generation. So we need to make sure that through this transition, that business has enough capacity to sustain succession. The pandemic has proven that Zoom and Microsoft Teams are effective platforms to hold meetings with multiple stakeholders. So I've certainly, over the last year, enjoyed meetings with solicitors and consultants and banks supporting our clients to good effect, cost effective without travel time, etc., and mileage. Hosting data in the cloud facilitates access to that data, be it accounting and financial data, or yield and application data from machinery, and data remains king to make informed decisions. If you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. Thank you. That's my presentation. I'm now going to press mute. I will pass over to Caroline.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much indeed, Nick, and welcome everybody as well. So I'm going to be talking about the farming to enrich the environment. That's not just the biodiversity piece, but obviously soil health, not to mention water quality and air quality as well. Next slide, please. Hopefully this is going to work. Thank you. So we're all very familiar with the global challenges that face us all on a day-to-day basis. Wildfires increasing, not only obviously in Australia, but also globally, floods, and we're just experiencing a lot of rain, and not to mention droughts and the challenges of locust attacks across Africa and India, and COVID-19. Next. Alongside that, if you think, I'm sure you're all aware and very familiar that Davos is about to take place. It's going to be a shortened version. There'll be another event in June. But when they were doing it this time last year, these were the challenges that they really felt were top of the agenda: extreme heat waves, destruction of ecosystems, health impacts by pollution, water crisis, uncontrolled fires. And that had sort of really escalated into the impact of climate change from 2019. Of course, only 10% of those leaders had actually predicted a pandemic. So from that perspective, if you look this year, what that's going to be looking like in terms of the challenges that they will be discussing, it will be all these issues which haven't gone away, because the predictions of the IPCC for our temperatures to be rising to that dangerous sort of breaking point of 1.5 degrees centigrade is by 2052 originally. They think could be brought back as early as 2027 to 2042. So those levels of predictions are the fact that we're not actually making a good impact to decelerate the challenges of climate change. Next. And then, of course, alongside that, I often wonder, when we're talking about sort of, who makes the decisions? Why are we doing this? Why is government driving into these areas of change? Who's the puppeteer out there? Well, for me, it's those United Nations and global targets. So we'll all be familiar with the COP21 key outcomes, the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreements. And COP26 that's taking place this year in Glasgow will be really trying to sort of accelerate that to the next level. But alongside that too is, of course, COP15, which I'm sure not everybody's so familiar with, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this is the whole sort of framing of all those things that actually as a farming sector we're really kind of impacted by, and we can provide a really good solution towards. In addition to that, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure you'll all be familiar in the sort of Millennium Goals of make poverty history. Well, in 2015, the Millennium Development Goals created 17 framed targets. And not like the Millennium Goals, which were just for developing countries, these are for developed countries as well. And we're not currently doing a very good job at actually mitigating against those targets. But they're really important, and we frame a lot of our work against those. Next, please. So when you look at sort of that whole area of farming and food and the challenges, and right through to things like, some 2/3 of the UK population will be obese or overweight. That hasn't been made any better, actually, by lockdown. Some of us have done better, some of us have done worse. And from that perspective, there is a real challenge around health. I was very fortunate. I did a Nuffield Scholarship back in 2013, and it was really looking at what can farmers do differently to actually be center stage in creating a solution to the bad health challenges we have around the non-communicable diseases, which are mainly those diseases that are kind of one biscuit at a time, extra glass of wine type sort of thing. And so when you start sort of boiling that down, it's therefore thinking, well, do we grow the right things? And actually, there is a fundamental mismatch between what is grown and what we should be eating. And I think, we're starting to see this coming through. It's partly through the Agricultural Transition Plan, but actually Henry Dimbleby's, the National Food Strategy, is really starting to kind of drive some of this of thinking, what can we do differently? But it's not that easy. We don't have the varieties. And in addition to that, we don't have the market. And although it's lovely going to the farm shop, I think the reality is, a lot of people will not buy their total shop from a farm shop. I'd be interested in that in the discussion later. Next. And of course, on top of that, diversity. We are not very diverse in our diets. I know I obviously up until last year spent a lot of time away from home, and I used to write on the fridge what my husband and daughter should be eating for the week. On the whole, a bit of a rotation. And actually, as society, we only eat about 10 meals on a rotational basis. And I bet you can pick all those meals that you get on a regular basis. And in addition to that, 75% of our energy comes from 12 plants and 5 animal species, of which 3 make up nearly 60%, namely maize, corn, and maize, wheat, and rice. So when you start looking at the fact that there are over 300,000 edible plant species, and we're just eating 12 for most of our diet, you start recognizing that actually we don't have that diversity. We haven't got that inherent resilience within our cropping system. Next, please. So this mismatch of our planetary boundaries, our health boundaries, and the food system is really where a lot of the discussion is. And for me, it was one of our farmers said the other day, he said, I get this now. I want to put Holland and Barrett out of business. And I thought, brilliant, because that is it. This is the sort of enhancing the nutritional content, the diversity of the food we grow and the food we eat. Next. So for a lot of farmers, it's kind of like, oh my God, where is it? Wake me up when they've made a decision. But for us as an organization, we work very much as a bottom-up approach, and that has to be the key part to all of this. One of my favorite sayings is, when all's said and done, there's a lot more said than done. And the reality is we've got to act. We've got to accelerate the speed of change. And some of the things that you were highlighting, Nick, in terms of good farming practice should be rapidly accelerated and scaled up. And next, please. That's something that as an organization, we've been really for the last 30 years, and I cannot believe I've been working for Leaf since it started 30 years ago when it literally was a table and a pencil, but we're celebrating that this year. And our focus has always been around more sustainable agriculture. So delivering and promoting climate positive, thriving, resilient and exemplar agroecological farming at an increasingly global level. We make no apologies. We are not just a UK organisation. We are a global organisation. We work with farmers, the food industry, scientists, environmentalists, teachers, young people and consumers, always looking to address productivity and prosperity amongst our farmers, enrich the environment. This is not just protection. This is ensuring that the environment is enhanced and engaging young people in society in a valuable and meaningful way. I'm not originally from farming myself, although, you know, I'd done the classic sort of pre-college, college, etc., and, you know, a year in Australia before I lectured at an agriculture college. And that and 30 years of leave. But, you know, that whole thing of we've got a brilliant sector. And so for farming and engaging the young people to want to be involved in food and farming is absolutely key. Next. So for us, we've just updated our 10-year strategy. This was launched in November. And we very purposefully thought the 5-year strategy is just going to be no good. I'm sorry, guys, but the next 5 years are going to be majorly bumpy. And from that perspective, there are some huge challenges. So I think for us, going for the 10 years, we will need to deliver against the SDGs. We'll need to deliver against the Paris Agreement. We will have delivered against all the post-2020 framework for biodiversity and the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we will have cracked it. Well, that's where we think that they really have to drive the change. So our vision and mission is very much around inspiring and being very positive, framed around 3 key themes, namely health, diversity and enrichment. And that's health of our farmers' bottom line, right through to the soil, the water quality, the environment and people, the diversity, again, of farming, our food and the culture and embracing culture and enriching land and indeed people's minds. We touch every 5 senses in farming. That's the best thing of engaging people in a more meaningful and memorable way. And so for us, that whole approach of integrated farm management has been our mantra. It's the best of traditional and the best of modern technology. And so, you know, you all know farming is like, it's like juggling with 9 balls at any one time. And so it's about soil management, crop health, energy use, pollution control, animal husbandry, water quality, biodiversity, etc. And keeping that balance going is really critical. So the framework of integrated farm management that we've delivered and developed over those years has been really, really key. Driving a more circular approach to agriculture, and this is this less leaky system, enhancing the efficiencies, and exactly as you said, Nick, you know, those marginal gains that are so critical. But for me, there's going to be 3 ways of really key changes in this area. I do CrossFit every morning. It's now on Zoom. I will have done, well, I have done this morning, over 100 burpees. And for anybody who knows how to do a burpee, God, it's bloody hard work. But, you know, I know if I had to do 100 on our Zoom call with everybody else who's much fitter than me doing 100 burpees as well, it's a chip away. It's just doing a little bit better each time, just doing it a little bit faster. It's the same for agriculture, that exact thing of adjustment of the tire pressures, the looking at the diagnostics, just doing a little bit better. So there's the sort of the chip away piece. The second is a fundamental reform of your farming systems. You know, if you introduce min-till into your system, there's a cost. You're growing new crops. You've got to dispose of those crops or work out where they fit in the environment. Is it going to be a green bridge, etc.? There's, you know, so there are some fundamental differences in terms of really trying to drive that. So that's your chip, your fundamental difference. And then there are those issues which are beyond kind of the capability of individual farms and indeed the farming industry, namely sort of some of the government sector issues of engaging with health and education, as well as DEFRA and BEIS and the trade situation, which we can contribute to and provide really meaningful solutions. Next, please. The other bit of our strategy has, of course, been around the key themes. I don't know if everybody knows of some of the work that we do, but we work in 3 areas, namely knowledge exchange and generation with a network of absolutely brilliant can-do demonstration farms who adapt, share, drive what they're doing and really move forward. So that continues to really be a good formation. And we work alongside that. We have the network of innovation centres, research organisations. And last night I was chairing a great meeting of Horizon 2020 researchers right across the globe that we work with we were talking about intercropping last night, which was wow, mind-blowing. In addition to that, it's about the market opportunity. So if you go into Waitrose, you will see on all their fresh produce leaf mark. 43% of UK fruit and veg is now leaf mark certified. It demonstrates where farmers have gone the extra mile beyond your core standard of a red tractor. It's the environmental enhancement. And then finally, we do a lot of education and engaging society. So, our new drive is building on this in these 8 cross-cutting commitments around climate positive solutions, beacons of excellence, measuring impact and harmonizing metrics. This is going to be really key. Build, a common language. The carbon is a classic example, and you raise the soil organic matter status measurements. We will have, we've got a large membership within Leaf, and each one of those will each have different techniques for measuring their soil, but also demonstrating the improvement of their soil health. Building sustainable food chains and growing the education and engaging society, cultivating sustainable health and building connections. We're not a large organisation. We work through partnerships, and together we can really go far in that way. So we are very much about scaling up our reach. We're currently in 27 countries, and that will look to sort of develop that further as well, particularly with Leaf Mark. So next, please. So when we sort of start thinking about the environment, this is something I was very fortunate. I sit now on the Trade and Ag Commission, but I also sat on Dame Glenys Stacey's group when she was looking at reducing red tape. And I think, as you will know, legislation is ultimately about avoiding harm to something. This is not about catching people out. It's trying to do the best of a job. And so I think when you're defining the environment, it's really important about the protection. And there are some great opportunities, not only of meeting the national commitments, transition from CAP to obviously to ELMS, but obviously these global commitments, protecting valuable and sensitive habitats, those special areas we all have on the farm. I'm married to a dairy farm. I've got my favorite field. I just love it. It's brilliant. My husband's got his favorite fields. And protecting these areas are really important, but then enhancing it. And of course, alongside trying to mitigate against these multiple emergencies. Next, please. So for us, this is about, 4 ways of trying to drive change. Can pretty well get you to drive and change in anything in terms of, there are 4 ways of doing it. First of all, make sure that you've kind of got the right system. So for us, that's integrated farm management. It allows those traditional areas of good rotation, good soil management, good variety selection, and all the agronomic aspects that are about to be talked about by David, right through to then the blending in the best of modern technology. And we mustn't forget that important area. The second is the show and tell. And for us, that's demonstration farm. The third is the market pull, hugely powerful. What the retailer says to a farmer, that's far above the legislation requirements. And then finally, if all else fails, that is when legislation is actually the key part to trying to ensure that things are right. It's really critical that in terms of understanding where ELMS fit in within your business, don't use your business, no end of people are saying, I'm waiting until they've made a decision. The reality is we have a really large challenge. This is the mood, the mood music is moving in this direction. Make sure you are doing the right thing for your business, not the right thing to actually look at how you can kind of address government's business. It's a supplementary support and a key part of your business, but it's not the driver of your business. Next, please. So as I said, sustainable farming is absolutely key. And I'm just going to give some very quick examples. Next, please. For soil management, it is that physical, biological and chemical attention to detail, the min-till, the looking at really enhancing soil health, digging the soil, looking at root structures, looking at introduction of things like cover crops, but we have only just begun to recognize the value of the biologicals in the depth of a soil. You know, we know how alive soil is, with billions of zoonotic protozoa bacteria that are alive in our soil. And the more that we can enhance our capability to manage that soil, the better it is. And it's a bit like our sort of our gut stomach as well. You know, we're only 10% human. 90% of our DNA rests within the bacteria that are thriving or not, depending on what we're eating, within our stomachs. Next. The energy efficiency piece. You know, you've really clearly highlighted it earlier, Nick. You know, there are actually, this carbon issue is ultimately about the challenge that we have about digging fossil fuels out of the ground. The more that we can actually reduce that, and that's very much impacted by our use of nitrogen fertilizers and tractor driving, the better it is. And this is where there's a great opportunity to kind of look not only to kind of nature, which has the biggest proven technology to address climate change, much smarter than us, but also some of these really sort of strong driving alternatives, enhancing nutrient efficiency and our capability in terms of our crops and, of course, our livestock. Next. We are really driving the net zero within agriculture, supporting, of course, the NFU's aspiration by 2040, but it is about carbon footprinting. If you haven't started, you know, do start measuring in this area. It doesn't matter what tool you use one that works for you, and at least make a start in that area. But I do sort of, yes, you know, it is important to measure, but not everything, you know, you can certainly measure what matters, but remember, not everything that matters actually can be measured. And renewables of, you know, the growth in renewables is something that's very, very key. Next. Indeed, we've got one of our farmers who's now the world's first carbon and plastic neutral food products. So it's Leaf Mark certified farmer, Duncan Farrington. And it's through the sort of the foundation that he had with Leaf Mark, and then moving that forward in terms of recording his energy use for over 25 years, putting in solar panels, planting trees, and improving and nurturing his soils. Next. And of course, you know, as nothing goes from the environment perspective without obviously good nature and conservation. We do a lot of monitoring, and, you know, I think all of you will be very familiar with how critical these are in terms of driving your business. Next. And we know from, you know, really focusing, some 13% of our farmers now will have 30% of the area of their farm will be down to environmental areas. And we work a lot with farmers, not only obviously live on farm, but at the moment, obviously kind of via Zoom, as you say, through clusters and discussion groups. But the importance of driving this change is something that's absolutely key. Next. And of course, waste. So just really finishing off, I think, you know, by looking at, next please, sharing and driving change, this exchange of information, learning and adapting. You know, I love the farmers that we work with. I go into a room, they are can-do farmers. They want solutions. They are not farmers who say, yep, I've done it. They're farmers who said, yeah, I've done it, but I still can't kind of crack this one. And they will see the ideas from other farmers. They will experiment, adapt, debate. And this is what it's all about in terms of really driving change to win the hearts and minds of really kind of moving forwards. And I think, next, please, we've learned through that importance of that exchange, and then measuring the impact through things like benchmarking. We have the Leaf Sustainable Farming Review, which the first one was 1993 that we developed the Leaf Sustainable Farming Review. And from that perspective, just how fast technology has gone, it was a carbon copy document, and the farmers sent us back the carbon piece. Now it's interactive online with support and automatic benchmarking and things like that. But measuring impact is key. Next. And we do it for everything we do, whether in its events like this, you know, has the depth of discussion hit the right mark? Was it too much, too little, etc.? Next. It's through things like with leaf mark in particular, and bearing in mind, leaf mark it's the only UK, in fact, it's the only global food standard that is ICEAL accredited for a complete whole farm approach. It is incredibly robust. It demonstrates the economic, environmental, and social impacts. It measures outcomes, but interesting, it offers earned recognition opportunities. It's the shortcut for farmers in this earned recognition space. Next. And I think, you know, as I said, 43% of UK fruit and veg is leaf mark certified, operating in 27 countries. And we have for the last 8 years been doing impact assessments in terms of knowing around what our farmers do. 52% will carry out all 8 aspects of best practice integrated pest management. 41% will record soil organic matter status. We're just sort of going through this sort of last year's figures at the moment, and hopefully those will be rising as well. 54% certified businesses are working with others in catchments. It's important of cluster grouping and things like that. Next. And of course, you know, why do people do leaf mark? Of course, it's the market opportunity. 97% said it does create that, but it also improves savings. It improves income, it improves the farm management, and it's actually the capability to say, I've got those credentials and capability. Next. And you know, we do map those quite considerably. I'm really conscious of time, and I just want to sort of quickly, if I can just, Elizabeth, if we could just skip through the next few slides. Next one. I just wanted to quickly sort of end off really about elms. One of the things that is important, as I said, you know, sort of government is sort of legislation is there kind of as your last resort, but at the same time, the opportunity of the Agricultural Transition Plan, the Sustainable Farming Initiative, which is where the money that is not going to go to BPS is going to support through new initiatives such as investments and other areas and to be defined as yet, but also this importance of the delivery of public goods through elms, and I'm sure many of you are kind of engaged in some of that, is absolutely key. We've been working now for the last 6 years with Jersey government. The whole of Jersey is leaf mark certified. They have used it as part of their mechanism for driving change. And I think what we will see going forward is this new trust model. So there is this sort of government, public and sort of a focus, the private focus, and the NGO sector. So if we can create that balance of this new trust model, that is ultimately going to be driving change. It is about collective efforts. And of course, through the elms, you know, these 6 main priorities will be things that many of you will be very familiar with, but there is reward from that. Next. Next slide, please. So, you know, we cannot hide. Change is definitely happening. Next. You know, the importance of nature underpins what we do. We're looking a lot now at nature-based solutions. This is not farming, and then with nature. This is actually looking to nature to provide some of those real food web opportunities in the field with our soil health, right through to climate adaptation, food and water security, sustainable development, that improvement of health outcomes, and of course our ecosystem services. Next. I love this. Geckos are just fantastic, but if you start thinking about, you know, we can't beat Mother Nature, this biomimicry effort of how smart, you know, things like geckos are that just can climb up walls without glue. You know, all of these adaptations that nature has, if you just think of within our body, all the things that go on are absolutely core to us working out new solutions going forward. Next. It will be driven by a much more circular economy. And I think, next, please, the future opportunities are there to be had. It is seeking transformative approaches to mitigate and adapt to climate change. That is a huge challenge. We had 68 inches of rain here, we're down in Cornwall. We'll usually expect about 55. 18.5 or 18.47, as my husband told me the other day, of those happened in the sort of December. I think, you know, the intensity of the rain, we're all feeling it. Net zero carbon emissions and sequestration is key. It's an opportunity for trading. It's an opportunity to improve the resilience and capability of our land. We do need to adopt and work with innovation and technology. It's fun, and at the same time, it's varied. Fostering that ambition and vision amongst the farming sector. It is a can-do attitude that's going to be key. Bedding the most efficient production with minimum losses. How do we really make plants more efficient at their capability to utilize nitrogen and all our nutrients, making less waste and less impact on the environment? And of course, working with nature based on data and strengthening our risk management tools. And I think, you know, as you've very clearly highlighted at the beginning, but working together and embedding nutrition as a value of food and farming, our own one. So for us, that's integrated farm management and circular agriculture. Next, please. Thank you very much. And, you know, I cannot emphasize enough, if you want to go fast, great. But actually, if you want to go far, you know, go together, because that's going to be the solution now. We have a lot of big challenges and they need to be delivered fast. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Carolyn. I'm going to steal one of your lines actually out of your presentation, which I think will fit quite nicely. If we could go to the next slide, please. That just doing a little better, I think, is going to be a theme that runs right the way through what I'm going to talk about this morning, because cost-effective crop establishment is absolutely critical to get maximum yield potential, and everything we do is now focused on productivity and outcome, and for me, it's attention to detail. And the base that we set with crop establishment runs right the way through the season. It's not all about what we do in the first couple of weeks, it's what happens after that and the consequences of choice, which we'll get onto. So get next, please. One of the great difficulties that when you talk about crop establishment is that the debate very quickly runs along the lines of the cost of establishment. How many passes am I going to do? How much horsepower am I going to need? How much diesel per hectare am I going to use, which comes up quite frequently? And the cultivation techniques that I'm using, either could be ploughing, could be full or in partial inversion, or we're direct drilling. And if you just move next, please. And these all impact on crop establishment for sure. And I'm going to run a theme all the way through now about the consequences of choice, because things that you choose to do early on in the season have an effect all the way through the season. And next, what I thought I'd do for this session this morning was just speak to some of the growers that I know, and those that are, and most of the people within agriculture are actually very honest and they're very open, and they'll tell you what they're doing and why they're doing it. And it's always quite interesting to get sort of real feedback. And I spoke to several people, and I just came up with 4 people that I'd spoken to, and they were all using different methods of establishing their crops. We've got a guy who's on quite a small farm, uses a McConnell seederator. And then I know that there's a farm, they've just moved to direct drilling about 5 or 6 years ago and invested in a cross-slot drill. There's obviously quite a few people are still plough based for all sorts of reasons. And then I spoke to a guy who's looking after 5,000 acres, and he's got a very substantial amount of kit on the farm. Next. And I just said to them, what is the main driver for what you do? And the guy that was ploughing said, well, used rotationally, this really reduces my blackgrass pressure, and that's the main reason that I'm a plough-based system. Next. And when I spoke to the chap that's running 5,000 acres, he said, well, yeah, you could criticise the fact that I'm probably got a horse Toronto cultivator in the system here, and a lot of people would argue I probably don't need it. But the reason I use it is that one pass with the Toronto can significantly reduce the amount of slug pressure that I've got on the farm. And if I don't use that piece of kit, it can cost me anything between 20 and 30 pounds a hectare. in slug pellets. So that's the reason I put that into the system. Next. My cross slot man, who's very enthusiastic about direct drilling, and they've changed the entire farm across to it. He's realised that after using it now for about 7 or 8 seasons that it does a very good job, but if he's following oilseed rape, he has to do a light cultivation, which goes a little bit against the grain for a direct drill system. But he was reflecting, interestingly, what the guy who was running 5,000 acres had said, that a light cultivation before he drills, or after he's had oilseed rape, before he drills cereals, gives him a significant saving in slug pressure. Next. And the chap that's a much smaller farm, he's one of these guys who likes to do everything in a really careful, conscientious way. And he said to me, it's a fairly steady piece of kit, this, but it's one pass. But I don't think I'm going to be able to use this drill to drill directly into cover crops, which is something I really want to do going forward. His final statement was quite funny. That said, but it does allow me to go caravanning in September because I don't have any pre-cultivations to do. So there are all sorts of driving forces out there. And next. One of the things that I've been sort of thinking about is that the consequences of choice initially are what you're going to gain in the short term, which are probably fuel costs and hectares covered, versus the long-term implications of how you go about crop establishments. And they can be the effect on soil structure, the effect on soil health, and that's going to have implications in carbon sequestration, as Caroline's just highlighted. Pest activity, how you establish a crop has a big impact on slugs and things like cabbage stem flea beetle, which everybody's been plagued with for the last 2 or 3 seasons. Weed competition, particularly difficult to control grass weeds like blackgrass, and I'll show you a little bit more on that in a moment. Timeliness of drilling can have a really big impact, and the ability to utilize cover crops in the system, which is something that many growers now want to do and are bringing this into the system. And it's like Caroline's saying, a lot of growers are looking to be able to bring more cover crops in there. But at the end of the day, we're trying to get some better yield resilience, because somebody once said to me a few years ago, when you put a seed in the ground, actually it just wants to grow. And what we've got to do is help that and not get in the way. And what we do makes a big difference. Next. And this is an example of the consequences of choice. On the left-hand side is an early drilled, minimal cultivated winter wheat crop drilled in September versus a relatively inexpensive establishment versus a winter fallow plough followed by a winter fallow and then spring wheat. And I think most people look at that photograph instantly and say, yeah, okay, we haven't controlled all the blackgrass in the plot on the right hand side. It would be wrong to say we have, but at least on the right hand side you can see we've got a crop of wheat, and on the left hand side you'll have to take my word for it that that is a crop of wheat in there with 500 heads per square metre of blackgrass, which was purely down to the consequences of drilling early and minimal cultivating. And so it makes a heck of a big difference depending on your choice of how you're going to establish the crop initially. Next. So just running through some of the parts of the crop establishment: timeliness of drilling, the flexibility of your system. The speed of establishment is important to ensure strong growth away from any threat. That could be weeds, it could be pests. Crop vigor is really important. It's linked to timeliness of drilling. It's also linked to the health of the seed and the seed bed conditions, and I'll cover some of this a little bit later on. Rooting capacity can be seriously limited by soil and seed bed conditions. So the actions that you take to produce the seed bed can have a major effect on how capable the rooting is going to be. And we know that the better the rooting structure, the more top growth we get. The more top growth we get, the more light will intercept and the more energy that crop will have, and the roots can be bigger. So there's a circle there that's really important. Anchorage. I've put that in because depending on how well the crop establishes can have a big impact on its root design and its soil interaction, and therefore when it's put under pressure from wet weather, how well will it stay upright and not lodge? And crop health, we know that crops that are under stress, that lack vigor, tend to be unnecessarily stressed, and that predisposes them to diseases and all sorts of other issues, and we get all sorts of problems with micronutrients as well. So crop health is a really important part of this establishment process, and the yield potential and the resilience of that yield is basically a sum of all of those parts of the equation. Next. This is just an aerial photograph of a trial that we have been running for about 10 or 11 years now, and it was set up not necessarily to look at establishment techniques per se, but it was really looking at if in a farm where blackgrass was out of control, and that photograph I showed you earlier on was from this particular field, where what could we do using cultivations to try and assist the performance of the herbicides that we have access to and try and get a better crop in that field? And so we split the field up into 24-meter strips running down the field, and did all sorts of different establishment techniques, including annual ploughing, where literally we ploughed it every single year before every single crop. We had a rotational ploughing system to compare against that. We had various spring cropping regimes. We've had fallows in there. We've involved cover crops in the system. We had a direct drill block, and we had an alternate winter wheat fallow, so a year fallow, a year winter wheat. We've also looked at producing AD rye and AD wheat as well, and that field has actually moved on now and has also got a grass strip in there as well. So we're trying to look at all the possible options that you might want to use to control difficult grass weeds. Next. Just as an aside, what I wanted to do in the field was find out what impact ploughing had on blackgrass seeds, and I couldn't look for blackgrass seeds in the soil because they're too small. So what I did was placed hundreds of orange beads on the surface, allowed the plough to go through, and then I had a look where these beads ended up in the profile. And we ran two sorts of ploughs, and there was a full inversion plough and a partial inversion plough, and it was quite interesting. The photograph on the right hand side shows the full inversion plough putting all of the beads, which would have been blackgrass seeds, right at the base of the furrow, and they were all at the same position and they were all down at the same level. Whereas if you look at the one on the left hand side, which was done with a slightly different plough, it wasn't a full inversion plough. It was more one of the ploughs that tends to just move the soil over to a certain percentage. And you can see that the beads in that profile are spread from at the bottom of the furrow right to the surface, or very close to the surface. The implications on crop establishment were that the full inversion plough reduced the blackgrass pressure quite dramatically immediately, and the partial inversion plough put some of the seed at the bottom of the furrow, some of the seed part way up the profile, and some near the surface. And the problem was that because it's a numbers game with blackgrass and we're burying millions of seeds, even a small percentage of the seed that isn't at the bottom of the furrow comes through and causes problems later on in the system. Next. Now, although this isn't supposed to be about blackgrass control, I think it just shows some of the implications that different techniques might have in this particular scenario. And this is just an excerpt from that particular field that you've seen. And you can see that where we ploughed in the blue bar, we had an initial reduction of blackgrass numbers. And in the 2012, 13, 14, and our non-inversion early drilling technique wavered from 500 down to 250 and then launched to 920 blackgrass heads per square metre. And at that point, we decided that there was no point in carrying on with that particular regime, and we'd have to do something fairly dramatic. And from 2014, with the non-inversion system, we moved into some spring cropping, and you can see the impact of the spring cropping had immediately, allowing us to have a winter fallow and being able to control the blackgrass during the winter and then establish the crop in the spring. And in that, which is in that particular series, you can see the impact of direct drilling. I did wonder when we first started whether direct drilling would be a plus or a minus in terms of its effect on blackgrass numbers. And you can see that we started fairly high because the field started with a very high population. But the use of the direct drill was quite interesting that the blackgrass population did fall away and then sort of lifted very slightly, but we maintained a relatively low level of blackgrass. And I think that was because a lot of the seed that was shed was left on the surface and it was predated, and the herbicides that we put on were quite effective at directly contacting the grass seeds that were on the surface. Next. The bottom line at the end of the day was what were those establishment techniques actually achieving in terms of yield. And if you look from the bottom bar upwards, a plough-based system in winter wheat, which it was in 2015, gave us a yield of just over 10 tonnes a hectare. And you'll see a line with an arrow at the top that says 6.1 tonnes per hectare. That was the level of yield that the winter wheat crop had when we took the field over. So despite all the herbicides that were available being applied to that field, the fact that the farm was establishing it in September with minimal cultivations was giving him a yield of 6.1 tonnes per hectare. And by just changing some of the systems, you've seen the impact that had on the blackgrass. The impact that it had on yield was also quite dramatic. So the plough-based system had gone to over 10 tonnes per hectare. The direct drilled system was also doing a very good yield. One of my, and I haven't presented yields from early years on this one, because I know from experience that when we looked at direct drilling, and the one thing you've got to be also very mindful of is that if you take a direct drill and put it into a field that's never had a direct drilling in it, it always puts the direct drill on the back foot in terms of it never looks like it really ought to. So once you've run that direct drill in a direct drill block for 4 or 5 years, you get a much clearer picture of what direct drilling will do. And it is quite interesting that that block is now very different to the plough-based system in terms of how it works, the number of worms that you can find in it, or particularly the size of the worms you can find in it. The alternate block it reduced the blackgrass pressure really quickly. It was a bit off the wall in terms of its approach, because 1 year, every other year being a fallow is not a way that a lot of farmers would particularly want to go, but you can see that it was yielding quite well. And then 3 years of spring cropping, and then followed by winter wheat, brought the yield at over 9 tonnes per hectare. The other 3 bars on there are quite a bit lower, but they're all spring crops, so you wouldn't expect them to be competing in terms of outright yield with the winter wheat ones. But you can see really at a glance just how efficient we'd managed to both control blackgrass in the block. It's not gone away, but it's a lot better than it was, and how much we'd lifted the yield and the cost of doing those cultivations. Some of them were a lot more expensive than what he had been doing before. Some of them were actually a little bit cheaper, but by changing things and paying a bit of attention to detail, we've had a very dramatic effect across the board. Next. So there's no escaping the fact that cultivation systems have a significant impact on crop establishment. It's very difficult for me, having seen what I've seen over the last few years, to argue the strong case for a universal cultivation system. It's wrong to say I think everybody should go to direct drilling. For some people, it's the right way to go. Minimal cultivations are the right way for other people to go, and there are certain circumstances where you have to say that on a rotational basis, there's a very strong argument for the plough. So there are many systems in there, and it's a case of finding one that fits for the particular case that you have. But there are a lot of other factors in there that can be also very important. Next. And again, please. Seed health. in terms of establishment is really important, and these are just some illustrations of what's going on in some of the trials that we're running. We've got some reclean seed, which we searched high and low to find reclean seed with a very high percentage of fusarium on it, and this was 49% fusarium infected seed, and you can see at a glance the effect that seed treatment had on the seed that had got 49% fusarium on it. Next. A photograph taken in the spring from that plot, and you can see this is a replicated trial, and you can see the untreated versus the Berry Gold side by side there, and you can see at a glance how poorly established the untreated seed is and how thin that crop is. But if we just move on to the next slide, these are the stats from that particular trial. Plant counts in November were really low. I'm going to show you some figures in a minute because there's something really quite fascinating going on in this trial. The plant biomass was a lot lower in June. The ear counts were down and the yield was down. Well, you would expect that given how thin that plot looked in that photograph. But if we can have the next slide, please. Thank you. What's really interesting is how a crop attempts to recover even in these situations. We've had, as I said, we've had 49% fusarium infection, which equated to a 45% reduction in the population of plants that we saw in the initial photograph. And during the course of the season, you can see how that 45% reduction in plant numbers in biomass in early June became 32%. So the crop was responding to the fact that it was a more open canopy, it was getting more light interception, and it was trying very hard to recover and build. And the ear counts in June were actually only 16% down, and the yield, although 1.5 tons is not what you're looking for, but remarkably that 45% reduction in plant numbers only represented a 14% loss of yield. So it does just show you that if you put plants in the right conditions and give them an opportunity, they will recover. And I think that trial nicely illustrates how the plant's ability to recover is there and clear to be seen. Next, please. Right. Okay. Thank you. This was there was a lot of late drilling in 2019, and we took the opportunity to drill some plots quite late. And again, this was a drilling date summary of the variety KWS X days. It has the breeder's latest safe sowing date is the end of January, and you can see at a glance 2 or 3 things going on with this crop. Optimum drilling date was clearly in October, if it was possible to do it then. And then there was a drop off in performance, and that was then fairly level right the way through November, December, January, February, into late February, which is now beyond the latest safe sowing date. But then when we moved into March, we were starting to see a decline, and then the cliff edge came on the 19th of March, which is really just a reflection of the fact that the crop was unable to vernalize. And so by the time instead of vernalization taking a week, it probably takes 10 to 12 weeks when you drill it at that stage in the season, and you never realistically get very many ears in the crop. So it shows you a certain amount of resilience. The crop is again trying to perform, but by drilling it in its optimum date, you're going to squeeze the best out of that crop. Okay, if we just go to the next slide, please. This was I put this one in because it was topical at the time about broadcasting. There's quite a few crops were broadcast drilled last year, and it's never the optimum way to do things. Depth control is very difficult when you broadcast. Herbicides, particularly pre-emergence herbicides, are extremely difficult to find. They can be quite harsh on seeds which are close to the surface or on the surface, and you can see that we produced a yield, but by broadcasting it as opposed to drilling it, we were giving away 2 2+ tonnes per hectare. So nobody likes to broadcast, and generally it's fair to say that most people only broadcast when they're stuck and haven't got many other options. Okay, if we just move on to the final area here, and again please. Nutrition, I've put this one in because this was a trial that we ran on some oilseed rape in 2019, and there are a lot of different treatments in there, and I haven't actually put the treatments in because for this illustration I don't think it's particularly necessary to do product comparisons, but what it does show is that the first bar on the left hand side was an untreated, and the second bar was another untreated, and then the remaining ones were different micronutrients that we were placed on almost from the day the crop emerged. And you can see, if you'd have seen the trial when this information on the 5th of November was actually generated, you would say the difference between the untreated and that third bar in was really small, and it looked like a very, very small difference, but you're building. And if we go to the next slide, please, you start building very early on, and that momentum just carries the crop. Again, these differences were quite subtle, but were clearly there in all of our treated trials. Next. And this again shows you how the height of the crop was affected, the vigor that would produce from early in the establishment phase in the autumn. It carried itself all the way through into May. And if we go to the next slide, please. Photographs often illustrate things better than graphs, but you can see there that the treatment 2, treatment 3, so untreated versus treated, the one on the left hand side, the lowest one, had not had any additional micronutrients. We just treated it with fungicides and fertilizers and insecticides, whereas the one on the right hand side had some micronutrition early on. We just developed a slightly bigger biomass in the autumn, and that small attention to detail in the autumn had carried through all the way through to that crop's look during the summer into flowering. And when it had reached terminal height, you could definitely see that we generated more vigor. If we go to the next slide, please. And that did actually carry through to yield. In this particular slide, it wasn't a statistically significant yield, but you can see that the nutrition, particularly that third and fourth bar along, and this is something that we've seen probably for about the last 3 or 4 years, that if we get the micronutrition right early on, the look can be very small in the autumn, but the foundation that you're building on carries you through all the way through and into late season, and quite often does give a significant yield response. Okay, if we could, yeah, thank you. If we go to the summary, attention to detail and close attention to the consequences of choice. Pick the appropriate cultivation system for the soil type that you're running. Aim to plant high vigor seeds and pay attention to early plant health, plant growth, and root growth in the ways that I've illustrated, and also look at the longer term implications and their effects, because at the end of the day, soil conditions are king. And aim to improve the soil conditions in the long term will give you better and more cost effective crop establishment. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for this opportunity to speak to you. So I've been tasked with determining whether the pandemic's changed food retailing. So before I start, always think that it's interesting to know what type of day it is today. And there's always seems to be, when I was a kid, it was always like Mother's Day or Father's Day. Now there's a day for everything. And today's not only Disc Jockey Day, which given my initials a DJ seems appropriate, but it's also Cheese Lovers Day and Penguin Awareness Day. And apparently penguins have been on the planet for over 65 million years, apparently, but their numbers are dwindling. So, oh, sorry, Caroline, I should have said next. Elizabeth should have said next. Sorry, yeah, cheese and penguin, sorry. I'll get you. So quickly, who are the East of England Co-op and why am I qualified to talk to you about whether the pandemic's changed food retailing? Well, the East of England Co-op are owned by over 260,000 members throughout, and it's the largest independent retail business in East Anglia, with more than 200 trading outlets located over 70 towns and villages throughout Norfolk, Suffolk and North Essex. We've got over 122 food stores, 66 funeral branches, stone masonry, travel, a security business, petrol filling stations, and a £100 million plus investment property portfolio with a mixture of commercial and residential tenants. And we've got over 4,300 colleagues who work for us. But what does that mean is on numbers hopefully you can understand. It means that over Christmas, we sold over 200,000 local mince pies from Peacock's Bakery, 28,000 Terry's milk chocolate oranges, and 27,000 Terry's white chocolate oranges, which I didn't even know were a thing. And Easter seems to have started early this year. We've already sold, last week we sold 8,000 Cadbury's cream eggs and nearly 8,000 Cadbury's mini eggs bags. So clearly people like mini eggs and cream eggs. So our members and local communities share in our success. Every year, part of our profit goes back to our members as dividend, along with investment into our communities, and the rest, obviously, about ensuring we can do what we do for the future years. And we're keen to play a vital role in improving the daily lives of our members, customers, colleagues, and we use our profit purely to make a positive local impact. Doing that responsibly, sustainably, and just so we can invest in our local communities. So next slide, please, Elizabeth. So we're best known for our food stores and our award-winning work with local producers. Proud to serve communities across since 1846, and proud to celebrate the local produce in our stores through our award-winning Source Locally initiative. And we now work with over 100 producers to bring thousands of products to our shelves. And this initiative was founded back in 2007 following the discovery that we were selling South American asparagus when there was fields full of the British crop just miles away, mere miles away. We took action and we sold over 33,000 bundles of local asparagus in our first season. Strength to strength. We currently work, as I said, with over 100 supply partners with over 2,500 products from fruit and vegetables, jams and chutneys, meat, fish pies, fruit juices, wines, and some locally produced cleaning products and charcoal. But what's really important to us is the relationship we have with those suppliers, and that's the key to the success. So for that, we adopt our 5 Ps policy. The product must be profitable for the producer, profitable for us, the right price for the customer, making sure that our producers are paid promptly and on time, and that they also receive professional support from our food safety experts. And we offer practical support, and the picture there is of Tim Buxton, who supplies our Norfolk stores with potatoes, and we helped him get their Carbon Charter accreditation. So not only did they receive a Golden Carbon Charter Award, but they were also named Norfolk Eco Producer of the Year back in 2018. So next slide, please, Elizabeth. And being sustainable is part of our DNA, and it'd be interesting. Probably another topic for another day is the impact of the pandemic on sustainability. But we believe in being a responsible and sustainable business, and that means looking at every part of our business and culture and being accountable for our impact on the environment and supporting our communities to thrive. So we continue to adapt to meet the changing needs and wants of our customers, and led the way on a number of initiatives. The picture there of our Waste Not Want Not campaign, our Guide to Data initiative, which got covered across the globe as far as New Zealand and Los Angeles. We've been asked to interview in Italian, which, given nobody spoke Italian, was a bit of a challenge. Solar panels, clearly we operate solar panels on some of our buildings. We generated over 58,000 kilowatt hours from our head office solar panels, but also our security business is provides one of the leading services of security to solar panel farms. We look at all the latest environmentally friendly technology, and you can see there the fridge doors, the sliding doors we put on our freezers, and that has had a real positive impact on our energy use and not impacted sales. But we're not here to talk about sustainability, just to give you some sort of context to how we're on our journey to become an environmentally responsible retailer, but clearly aware there's lots to do. But on to the main question, has the pandemic changed food retailing? If you go on to the next slide, please, Elizabeth. So what we've got here is a picture of our in terms of number of baskets in our food stores. And this is 2020 versus 2019. That big spike is as the country entered lockdown. And you can see that the number of baskets fell dramatically, has not recovered to the levels we saw in 2019. So it has had a big impact. If we can go on to the next slide, please. But while the number of visits has fallen, you can see that the spend has grown. And I think for us, we've been trying to stay ahead of the curve, given the constantly shifting goalposts of government announcements, which has been a feature of 2020 and is likely to be a feature of 2021. So COVID-19 created quite a lot of growth in the grocery market, predominantly from out-of-home switching. So what do we mean by that? That's where people have been able to access home travel, leisure, pubs and restaurants. So they've been switching. So we've seen a big increase in our beer, wines and spirits category, for instance. And I don't think it's all attributable to homeschooling. 2020 has also seen a big increase in the online channel, 30% increase, with further growth expected in 21 and 22. And larger stores, some of the big hypermarkets have suffered most from the growth online. And some of the predictions say that this surge in online sales mean the value of this channel will overtake hypermarkets and will go on to take over £1 in every £11 spent on grocery in 2022, which is a much faster progression than was previously forecast. Convenience and discount share of the market is broadly moving in line with the sort of previous forecasts, and the online channel's accelerated growth will principally come from large stores. There's also expected to be a strong demand for value as unemployment escalates. Over 176,000 jobs disappeared in 2020, and we continue to see losses in 2021 as shops continue to struggle under lockdowns. And one prediction is that up to 200,000 more jobs in retail could vanish in 2021 due to the pandemic-related restrictions hitting footfall and sales in physical stores. Price competition, we think that will intensify as people battle for market share. And increased home working alters how and when stores are shopped. And I said there about one of the big things that's about the increase in online, and we're predominantly a convenience store retailer, so that basket spend you saw in this slide, that when we were in 2019, we're talking about average basket spend of around £8.50, and you can see that continued to about March. It then shot up and is now hovering well over the £10 mark. But we, for years, have struggled to know how we could make online shopping work if the average basket spend is £10. If we go on to the next slide, please, Elizabeth. So I said we've worked, and we've got that rural footprint across our stores. But where there's a will, there's a way, and necessity can be a driver of innovation. Because we knew we had to help our communities during the pandemic. So we teamed up with Snappy Shopper to provide a great range of products for fast delivery within 30 to 60 minutes from order. Just before Christmas, we did a 6-week rollout program. We've now got Snappy Shopper in 25 stores, and it's doing over 1,300 orders a week. And before Christmas, when we started generating £40,000 a week turnover, which is as much as a small store for us, over the 3 weeks of Christmas, this Snappy Shopper business generated nearly 3,000 orders, £94,000 of sales, with an average order value of £32.88. So significantly ahead of what people store visits, and it's continuing to grow and grow. And now we did £94,000 just over the 3 weeks of Christmas. Last week we're up to nearly £95,000 a week. So as you can see, there is a big growth in online, and that's needed. So that sort of speedy delivery. So we're very pleased with how that's going out, and it was a very, very quick rollout. But back to the main question, has the pandemic changed food retailing? In a word, yes. We've seen the shift to online, which is going to impact the market. Increased home working is likely to alter how and when stores are shopped. And one of the other big things we've seen during the pandemic is the importance of shopper safety There's been a lot of media over that in 2021, and it's a big concern of shoppers, especially now. But has the pandemic changed who we are as a retailer? Probably not. As a community retailer and a cooperative, supporting others is at the heart of what we do, and we'll continue to do that. We all know how important it is to be part of and feel supported by a local community. And that's why we believe we're in this together, we can make a real difference. And we're going to continue to use our profit to make a positive local impact. We want our increasingly vibrant, ambitious cooperative to play that vital role in improving the daily lives of our members, customers, colleagues and communities. So just to sort of wrap up, if we can go to the next slide, please. As I said, it's Cheese Lovers Day, and so you can now buy our cheese online. And finally, it's Penguin Awareness Day, and Elizabeth, and we do sell penguins. I picked up yesterday. But really, just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity. And clearly, there has been a big shift in changes within the food retailing market because of the pandemic, in terms of the shift to online, the sort of reduction in number of visits to stores, and the importance of shopper safety. So that's all I was going to say, really, and look forward to the opportunity to answer any questions you might have.
Good morning. Thank you to our speakers, and a very warm welcome from me to this morning's Digital Farming Summit. I'm Will Mitcham, a partner at agricultural consultants Wilson Raitt, and the mantle now passes to me to chair a short question and answer session with our panel. I am conscious of time. We're due to wrap up around 10:30. But please ask any questions you may have for our panel in the chat box, and I'll endeavour to ask as many of these as possible. To kick things off, though, a question from me, please. We saw at the very start of today's presentation from Nick earlier slides that focused on the challenges of profitability facing UK agriculture. Many businesses have sustainable aspirations, and I see firsthand as a farm business consultant on quite a few occasions how these aspirations fail or conflict to address the short-term financial pressures that the business faces. Caroline raised Leaf's 10-year farming strategy, and I'd be interested to hear from the panel their view on how we strike the balance and address the challenge between a business's short-term commercial aspirations and requirements versus long-term sustainable production. Perhaps Nick, I'll come to you in the first instance, please, on this one.
Thanks, Will. So I think the question's suggesting how one can manage the short-term investment of repositioning the business in order for it to be sustainable long-term. I think that's what I sort of took from that. So I think at the heart of that has got to be an effective financial plan to understand the cash need of the business. That cash need is going to be driven by the sort of transition strategy. I think through David's discussion and indeed Caroline's, for a farm to reposition itself to be sustainable through this transition period, it's going to require investment in terms of machinery, investment in sort of the technique and sort of the land, etc. So I think one needs to measure that and ensure that there's sufficient capacity in the short-term working capital. If that transition requires investment in infrastructure, then obviously there's going to be term debt that needs to be raised. So one needs to be confident that you've got sufficient working capital and profit to service that debt. So the heart of that, as you'll identify with Will, is an effective business plan and forecast, but then potentially undertaking sensitivity analysis to understand, well, if I don't meet these objectives, or I don't do this, I don't do that, then how much wriggle room have I got, so that you are trying to build into your business that sustainable sort of cash position. I think that's my answer to that question from a financial perspective.
Nick, thank you for the answer. Caroline, over to you, please.
Thank you. I think, I mean, one of the very first things is taking stock of what you've got, as Nick has said, both financially, but also, this is where the Leaf Sustainable Farming Review is very, very useful. It does focus in on the capability of what your real strengths are. And I think, both David and I have really stressed this importance of attention to detail, being in control of the things you are in control of. There's a lot of things you're not in control of. And it's really critical that you really take a very strong grasp of the things that you are in control of. I mean, I think there are new options coming along as well. The volatility means, well, I mean, the price of wheat at the moment is fantastic. So, we will see volatility going up and down. And I think it's very likely, and I'm sure we might get onto questions about food poverty, but, farming is not there to be a solution to the poverty issues that we're experiencing around some of the food challenges out there at the moment. And, we do need realistic prices, and we may well see prices going up. And already, predicted between 8 to 10, anywhere from 8 to 10%, just from transport aspects, right up to 40%. I've heard it in some sectors. I think, do look at ELMS, look at the stewardship options, look at the sustainable intensification farming, the sustainable, what's it called? It's the pathway for farming, sustainable farming initiative, which is the pathway for where that money options will be. Well, it will be on investment, it will be on training opportunities, and collaborate. There's a lot of kit. It always amazes me how much kit is just kind of resting for so much of time. And so that opportunity to work on a more collaborative, effective, share machinery, I know that can be challenges, and make sure the biosecurity is right. Otherwise, all those challenges of blackgrass that David was highlighting can be a real problem. And look at the new money options. Start thinking about, biodiversity offsetting, carbon offsetting, carbon trading. What are your opportunities, as well as potential diversification options? I'm not a great fan of diversification. My husband calls me his diversification. Obviously, I'm a big fan of me, but I think the reality is that, really focus on the capability of doing your business well. As soon as you diversify, you have to move into skills and areas, and potentially buy in areas that you haven't been experiencing before. It takes a lot of time and energy. And at the moment, there really needs to be a reflection on the here and now.
I think, Caroline, that was very aptly and visually summarised by Nick's earlier slides, where he focused on enhancing profitability of the business rather than focusing on or looking at diversification to be the panacea, to be the band-aid to cover up that crack that is missing from the business not seeking its optimum performance. David, a question for you, please. Just developing my question further, there's a lot of buzz in agriculture at the moment regarding regenerative agriculture. And again, that sort of, to some extent, really does epitomise perhaps the short-term financial requirements of a business versus these longer-term sustainable aspirations. Of course, if a business isn't seeking its commercial aspirations, it won't be there in the long term to be so concerned as to what the soil health and sustainability looks like. So in your experience, what advice would you give to our attendees on today's conference? How you would advise them to manage any transition period, or how to manage change within their business as they start perhaps a journey down to more regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, okay. I think that historically farmers have, in my experience, been very good at making changes. So I don't think that any changes, there's a lot of chat about changing where we are. Regenerative agriculture comes up now quite frequently. But you've only got to look back over the last 25 years and see how farmers have adapted to all the changes that have been asked of them. And they're always in this position where, as Caroline said, there are certain things that, and I'm the same, the more things that you can control yourself, the better, because there's a whole range of things out there that you've got no control over. And as soon as you allow things to be dictated to you by things you can't control, the more out of control it actually becomes. And I think that regenerative agriculture is the buzzword at the moment, but I think if a lot of people sit back and have a think about it, they're all probably part way down the regenerative agriculture route anyway. A lot of it is very sensible agriculture about, it's more difficult, I think, to incorporate it where you're not a livestock farmer, but there are certainly quite a lot of ways that you can and do already have a certain amount of regenerative agriculture in your system. So it's just a matter of expanding that area of it, and I think to a certain extent most people are partway down that road already.
David, thank you for that. Dave, changing the angle of the question slightly to yourself, where do you see, or how do you see the role of the farmer in the food chain and adding value moving forward? So you mentioned very early on in your presentation the story of Mr. Buxton, the farmer. Do you see there being more Mr. Buxtons in the future, or a collaboration of Mr. Buxtons, or how do you see that panning out as things progress?
That's a good question. I think it will depend on what the farmer's looking to achieve, doesn't it? And I mean, we're very much willing to sort of support the local farming community in being a outlet for their products, but it depends on what they are and where it fits into the whole scheme of things. So yeah, very much keen to be supportive of the farming, but I think, as Caroline said, it's a lot about collaboration and working out what people want to achieve and how we can help them. But I think generally, one of the pandemics shown is that people are stronger together, and we just need to work together, be more collaboratively. And we had some great examples in our Source Locally initiative where we were having misshapen tomatoes that were being, instead of being wasted, were going to our sort of one of the businesses who was making salsa because they didn't care. So it's about working together really, and if we can facilitate that, we'd be happy to do that.
Doug, thank you for that. I'm afraid that the next question comes from one of our attendees, from the chat towards yourself. I think it could have been asked by Marcus Rashford looking at it. Does the co-op encourage its local partners and farms to support food banks and charities supporting school meals locally? And has this changed during the pandemic?
Yeah, so yeah, we have changed our approach, and yes, we did support the Marcus Rashford campaign. So yes, we supported the food voucher campaign and topped it up to make it at the right level for people, so that they at the level that Marcus suggested. And what we did was we pay, as I said, we pay our members dividend, and we changed our approach and created a community care fund right at the outset of the pandemic. And we asked people when they got their dividend, they gave people the option to donate their dividend, and kindly hundreds and hundreds, well, nearly thousands of people did donate their dividend. And we've used that to support food banks, other charities, all people who've been impacted by the pandemic. So we created that community care fund to help. So yeah, that included food banks and school meal vouchers and things like that. So yes, very much so.
Thank you, Doug. The questions come in for Nick. With small farms and small agri-businesses increasingly coming under financial pressure and becoming unsustainable, do you see an increase, Nick, in the number of council tenancies that may come to market? And I think the question can be widened, as has been asked, to actually more opportunities being presented to clients to take on contract farming, FBT type scenarios from your own experience.
Gosh, there's a number of threads to that question. I think it's inevitable that smaller farming operations may become unviable, and I think that will very much depend on their ability to maximise the opportunity around some of the schemes. But there's a reason that DEFRA have introduced a lump sum payment in expectation that some may choose to exit the industry. I think the ability to retain a small-scale farming estate, I think the landscape will change, where potentially we have perhaps fewer farmers, but perhaps a fabric of landowners with smaller holdings that are farmed by contract. I think that will enable large farmers to drive economies of scale and dilute costs across a larger area to be cultivated. I think the tax reliefs associated with land will be a factor too, i.e. Do you still retain the tax reliefs associated with owning land, or do you only get those tax reliefs when you farm that land? So, you know, there's a number of threads to that question. I think it's inevitable that smaller farming operations may become unviable, and I think the ability to retain a farming estate, I think the landscape will change, where potentially we have perhaps fewer farmers, but perhaps a fabric of landowners with smaller holdings that are farmed by contract. I think that will enable large farmers to drive economies of scale and dilute costs across a larger area to be cultivated. I think the tax reliefs associated with land will be a factor too, i.e. do you still retain the tax reliefs when you farm that land? So I do think this is Caroline alluded to it, and I think, this is a real period of significant change to the sector. And I think there are multiple levels of how that change could impact. But I do fear that there will be some very difficult decisions to be faced by those smaller farmers whose, by default, the level of subsidy is a big proportion of their income. And if they cannot replenish that from elms, and they don't have the economies of scale from their core farming activity, then I do fear that may cause some disruption in that part of the sector.
Can I just bring David into that conversation, please? David, if we're going to make the assumption going forward that there'll be more opportunities presented to businesses to broaden their footprint of operation in some way, you've rightly spoken about the requirement for attention to detail within our farming activity, and taking a very bespoke approach to the resources and the soils that you're presented with. Do you see that becoming ever more important, and rather than just looking at an opportunity that may be presented to take on a block of land in some shape or form, that actually you need more than ever to get the spade out, to start to look actually at what you're taking on, rather than just assuming because it's a neighbouring farm it's in good health? It seems obviously there's quite significant implications for soil conditions, as alluded to in your slides.
Yeah, there is, and I think that's a really important point. That and I think anybody who's taken on a new block of land now would inevitably look at it over the course of the year. When land comes for sale, you can have a look at them, and there's a class time to go around and look at fields, which is usually June, which will be at the time when the things that aren't nice are poking out the top of the crop and make it obvious that there are certain problems. And to a certain extent, you can look at the weed spectrum across a field, and it gives you a bit of a feel for what the potential problems of that particular soil type are. Heavy lands have different weed issues to light land farms, and certainly getting the spade out and having a look at what the soil structure's like and how much work needs to be done to it, because the issue revolving around soils are that there's no quick fix here, and that to be able to turn a soil from not very good into reasonable into very good is something that takes several years to do. And so, it is really important to be sure that you know what you're taking on before you get there and start, and have some realistic expectations of a timeline that's going to take you to do it.
David, thank you. Oh, Caroline.
Yeah, well, can I just go back to the size question? We have a lot of small farms, but they have glass houses, and so their turnover and their income is huge. So it's the size issue is a really interesting question, and I think we need to analyze a lot more about the profile of those farmers that are most at risk and those farmers that have the biggest opportunities. And because I think the age factor comes into it a lot. In terms of people's expectations, particularly families. Everybody's, very uneasy if you've got a family farm and one of the, 5 or 6 children or whatever is running the farm. That infrastructure issue. You've got the whole issue about, as alluded to, about whether local councils will be putting more land up. The reality is these local councils are strapped for cash, and so they see land as opportunity for building housing and low-cost housing. So I think we really do need some serious economic analysis done about identifying the opportunities and those farmers most at risk, because then we can make a better case to sort of help support whether it is a transition out of farming, or whether there are new models of doing this with young people, or, as we've seen in the fresh produce sector, the opportunity for a sort of a consolidation where you might be still farming, but actually you're farming as part of a bigger cooperative type approach. And I think, we need to be much smarter with some very new ideas in this area.
Well,
sorry.
Well, I was just going to come back because I think it's worth emphasising this issue around security of tenure, because some of those small farms may be on a farm business tenancy. Certainly, obviously, a council farm is on a tenancy. And it's clear to me, Caroline just mentioned investment in glass houses. So you might think, well, I might do that, but you've got to have security of tenure if you're not the landowner to prepared to make that investment. So I know the Tenant Farmers Association, have got a strong voice on this issue, but I think that's another aspect of reform that needs to be thought through. Because if you are a tenant farmer and you want to remain in the industry and you want to embrace the opportunities that elms presents, or diversification into soft fruits, grass houses that it might present, then you've got to have comfort that you've got the length of occupation to get the benefit of that. And that's also then going to have implications on those landowners who perhaps are holding the land as a tax efficient investment with a tenancy arrangement, etc. So I think that there's proper reform that needs to be considered, but security of tenure, particularly for small farmers on tenancies, is absolutely key.
Nick, thank you. I've got a few questions I'd like to try and ask reasonably quickly to our panel before perhaps we start to wrap things up and hand back to Nick to summarise. Questions coming, Caroline, for you. You mentioned changing health demands and an increase perhaps in diet and producing more fruit and vegetables. I think we could probably expand the question that's been asked to climatic shift in the UK perhaps, and whether this presents opportunities for growers to perhaps change the crops that we may grow. And if so, do you anticipate or hope that the margins for any change in farming practice will result in profitable crops being grown in the UK?
Well, I mean, I think without a doubt, yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. The farmers yesterday that were on the session I was chairing were up in Aberdeen and growing lentils, a crop kind of we sort of see as a more Mediterranean crop. So there are opportunities, but there's a lot of things that need to be kind of lined up. It has to be the market. It has to be around the sort of having the right crops to start off with, the right genetics, the right chemistry to support it, the right integrated pest management strategies, where it fits within the rotations. Well, if you look at obviously legumes in particular and protein crops, there's such an opportunity, whether it be for humans or indeed for livestock, to actually build our capability in the protein area. But it does need investment, and that needs a lot of R&D investment, infrastructure and support investment going alongside that. But I think the opportunity has to be great. It also needs doctors to actually recognise food and diet as part of the sort of curative response to health issues. And I think, anybody who's experienced a sort of a major health issue will know that, if you ask for dietary advice, doctors don't do that. They do half a day in their whole training. So I think, that this is the responsibility at so many levels, and it needs us as a farming industry to kind of think food rather than think commodity as well. And you really start sort of saying, yeah, we are central. Food is, well, the National Health Service, and, they're doing a wonderful job in terms of the challenges around COVID, but they don't deal in health, they deal in illness. And actually, we as a farming industry should be dealing in health and ensuring not only, we say, yay, the health of my soil, the health of my crops, the health of my livestock, but actually we should be also passing on that. And this is a really healthy crop as well for people's inherent kind of diet. And I just think we need to change some of the language and also some of our own thinking.
Caroline, thank you. David, one for you, please. I mentioned earlier, I think that I sense that regenerative agriculture is a bit of a buzz phrase at the moment, but equally so is robotics, which is gaining more traction and momentum. From your perspective, what role do you see robotics playing in arable agriculture, short, medium, and long term?
Inevitably, it's going to come. At the moment, we've all seen photographs and short videos of driverless tractors and probably a lot of people own lawnmowers that run around cutting the lawn without any input at all. So the robotics are there. They're in a stage at the moment where truly robotic applications are at the moment extremely limited. But technology will change, and I don't doubt for one moment that robotics in all sorts of various ways will become quite important. It might come down to not establishing crops, but monitoring crops during the course of the year. At the moment, we can do that to a certain extent from satellites. Well, it's not a major extension to think that that could be then translated into some kind of robotics on the ground for ground truthing, for example. So that would be a fairly simple application of robotics. But in terms of, will we at a stage where all you'll do is click a computer and something will start in the corner of the field and cultivate or drill? I think we're some way away from it, but I wouldn't put it beyond the realms of reality at some stage in the not too distant future.
David, thank you.
Can I quickly add to that? Obviously, in the dairy industry, there is an increase in robots, but as David highlights, bringing a robot in doesn't kind of cure your problems. It's another tool in the box. And, I know there's been a huge amount of issues here where people think, oh, it's great, the cows will be outside in the summer and they'll walk around. And what happens is you have a winter building, which you then have to change because it's not fit for purpose, because the cows want to stay inside all the time. And so, the infrastructure cost of bringing in any new technology can be hugely costly. And I think, we're certainly starting to see amongst some of our members, particularly robot usage in the pack houses. And, there's some pretty cool, funky things, whether they be cherry sorters and their capability to take many, many photos on one cherry. So, they are good, but as it is stressing the importance, it's one of the tools in the whole box.
Caroline, thank you. I think we'll just come to one final question that's been asked via the chat. And this one is for you, Doug. I don't know whether you're going to be able to give us a view on what percentage of fresh produce sold by the East England Co-op is sourced from local producers, but I think it's the back end of the question that perhaps also ties in with one that I posed at the start, which is maybe just to summarise what you see as the opportunities to work with groups of farmers to collaborate, to focus on local sustainable food production, and actually ways that you see that this can be increased or facilitated moving forwards.
Okay, well, yeah, we have about 7% of our food turnover comes from sort of sourced locally, but that's across the board. That includes beer, wines and spirits, jams, chutneys, etc. So that's about £18 million. In terms of opportunities, yes, there's opportunity to increase that, but it's about finding that niche, that point of difference. What can we offer that we're already not offering to compete with the major product lines, really? So it's about being innovative and creative as well, really, and it's what the customers want to purchase as well. That's what we do. We do little trials to start with, make sure it's working before we roll out. So, yeah, but there are opportunities, definitely.
Perhaps, Caroline, just to bring you in on this final point, Leaf, collaboration, bringing farmers together, do you see yourself having a role to play as an organisation in that moving forward?
Well, I definitely hope so, yes. Yes, I mean, that's what we do. That's what we're about. I mean, I think our beacons of excellence with the demonstration farms are a really good centre point for a lot of the debate in these issues. And we're now driving in things like, the sort of demonstration schools as well. And in addition to that, to me, it's really interesting because there's two areas of cluster activity and collaboration. One is, field scale type basis and catchment scale work. But I think the other is also kind of this mind landscape where people have shared values. And, increasingly we're seeing that can-do, positive, solution-driven type farmers really wanting to drive change and be in the same place as many others in that area. We've got an ELMS project in the moment, which looks to see the use of the demonstration farms as a facilitator. We're also doing quite a lot of work now with advisors and consultants as well in this whole area too, because it's kind of, escalating messages and building things together. Absolutely key. So thank you.
Caroline, thank you. As we've run a few minutes over 10:30, I think it's now time for me to draw this short Q&A session to conclusion. Today's Digital Farming Summit was titled Developing a Sustainable Farm and Improving Profit. My key takeouts from today, we saw in particular in Nick and David's presentations, that to achieve that goal, it seems clear to me that technology and the digitisation of data will have a growing role to play in agriculture. But it's absolutely imperative that we must always ensure the accuracy and the relevance of that information. I think it's very easy at the moment to get lost in data, total data saturation, get lost in figures to actually the point that you can't utilise it. I think it's always important to stop and consider what is the output you require to give you as an advisor or a business owner the information you require to make that informed decision to progress your business forward to satisfy your profitability and sustainability goals. But perhaps for me, probably lastly and most importantly, I think a lot of us find ourselves guilty of overcomplicating things. But I think the mantra, keep it simple, is one that often gets lost in much of what we do. So from me, thank you once again to our excellent panel. I thoroughly enjoyed their presentations this morning. And I'll hand you now back to Nick Banks, who's going to sum up.
Thank you very much, Will. Yes, I think that's brought us to the end of today's session. I would just like to extend my grateful thanks again to Caroline, Doug, David and Will. I hope you found it very interesting. I think it has shown all the issues that are very apparent that we all have an obligation as advisors to support our clients through a period of significant change. With that in mind, we have our second session next week. If Elizabeth could just flick the slide, please. Thank you. So next week, please do join us. I know a number of you attending today have registered for next week, but do join us because we're carrying on some of the themes that have been discussed today. So we have Katerina Snakova, who's an economist from NatWest Group, joining us, who will be talking around the economic. The banks clearly see climate change as a serious issue in their sort of policies going forward. And Katerina will have a presentation exploring some of those issues, particularly with an interesting map that I've seen in terms of sort of rising sea levels and the impact on real estate that they have a lot of security over. Adrian and Sam, who those of who joined us in our event last January, Adrian and Sam gave an informative discussion around sort of machinery, technology development, precision farming, and I think picking up on some of David's presentation around the machine choices, it will be interesting to learn from Adrian and Sam from Tuckwell's. If they're seeing, this change in sort of horsepower and demand for different units, etc. Then Gavin joins us, picking up on some of the tax issues. As I say, we're away to budget, the expectation being it'll be quite a fruity budget. There's clearly a huge economic impact of the pandemic, and debt has to be repaid. And a tool to do so is tax. So how that will potentially impact, and some of the other observations arising from the Office of Tax Simplification Review of Capital Gains Tax, etc. And then we're also joined by Mark from the Egg Council to talk about the poultry sector, which again, the demands from the pandemic, hospitality closed down, demand for egg product has changed significantly. We also have a panel session on our second day, and that will be chaired by Andrew Knowles, who's the Chief Executive of Framlingham Farmers. So that wraps it up. Thank you everybody for attending, and I wish you all a good day. Take care. Thank you very much.